I've been living in Germany now for over a decade, and it's not the first country I've moved to, but it is the country that I've stayed in the longest since leaving home. It's not something that I really planned for. The whole experience just kind of happened, and if I were to do it again, I would definitely be much more intentional about it. Moving country is a huge undertaking, and it can be a transformative experience. It can change you in ways which you just can't imagine right now. Most of the things that I will share today are things concerned with communication and relationships, just because I found these things to be incredibly important. Now, some of these are things that I maybe should have or wish I'd done differently, but a few are things which actually wouldn't change. I would really love to hear about your own experiences. Even if you haven't moved country, just moving to a new city or a new part of the same country is challenging enough in and of itself. So I would really like to make this a conversation rather than me just blabbering on. So please do leave a comment down below. Burning bridges or burning the ships to the shore really are metaphors which I love. They really conjure up extreme Kopfkino or extreme images. But what I really mean by this is do not lose contact with important people back home. I think it is easier to lose contact than most of us think. The impetus is to really dive headfirst into the new country, the new culture, the new language, really getting acquainted with everything, which is definitely the right course of action. That's definitely how we should go about things. But, it can be often overwhelming, and we kind of do just sort of forget about things back home, and you can very quickly lose any sort of relation to, your former life. And while this is kind of natural, you will lose friendships, you will lose connections. That is kind of a natural part of growing up. But if there are people in your life that you do really see as important, then it will actually become an effort to maintain this contact. It doesn't always just happen very naturally. And so it's just important to be aware of this, bear it in mind, and really make the effort to keep this contact going and to maintain the relationships. When I left the UK for the first time over 15 years ago, things were very different. There was email, you could text people, but making a phone call was often hugely expensive. And in today's world, there really is no excuse not to maintain contact because everything is pretty much free. Research is, of course, very important. It's very important to look up things online, check visa requirements, immigration laws, how to find an apartment, all that kind of stuff is very important. But I think when it comes to research, the best thing you can possibly do is to just visit the country that you are thinking of moving to. Take a holiday, even if it is just for 1 or 2 weeks. I would definitely stay in an apartment or a house rather than a hotel. I think this way you get a really genuine, authentic experience of what it could possibly be like to live there. Because you'll be doing all the usual daily stuff like cooking, cleaning, washing, shopping. And I think there is no better way to get a feel or a sense of what something could be like than to actually be there physically. Leave your ego behind. Now, I'm not going to get too philosophical in this video, but I do think this is a very important point to note, maybe the most important point on the list, because when starting anything new, your ego will get bruised, damaged, maybe brutally attacked, especially when moving country to a place that speaks a foreign language on top of all the foreign customs and cultures. You will be in situations where you are very confused, you don't understand what's going on, and people might be behaving in a way that seems wrong to you and might seem offensive to you. And it's just very important to be aware of these things. This is something that I have, thankfully, I've gotten over this hump. I did go through it, and now everything's pretty much settled. But I do notice this with other people who move here or have only been here for a very short time. There are just so many situations where they get very frustrated and they start to get offended and take things personally. And I do remember when I first moved here, I went to a market with a German friend of mine, and I was at the vegetable stand wanting to buy some vegetables. And I didn't really understand what the seller, the lady, was saying to me, but I just sort of got a sense that the way she was saying it was very abrasive, it was very harsh, very unfriendly. The facial expression also was very unfriendly. And I started to think, what have I done wrong? What is going on here? Why is she being so unfriendly? This is just, this is uncalled for. And my German friend was like, what's wrong? What's going on? Why are you so upset? Because he then explained that she basically, all she was saying was, do I want anything else? There are so many examples of this where it's just all about miscommunications. And, body language and facial expressions often differ between cultures. So this is something that you will have to go through. So learning the language is, for me, a no-brainer. It's obvious, but it had to make this list just because it is so important. The most important point to note is to just do it. Just learn the language. I know it is very hard. It can be very frustrating, but I think one completely false assumption is that just moving to the country, being in the environment will, somehow magically help you to learn the language. And I am a huge fan of deep immersion, but this is only going to help. It's only going to work if you have a base already. And I would suggest if you are somebody that really struggles with learning foreign languages and does really not enjoy it and has no interest in learning languages, then it's probably better to move to a place that speaks to a language already. And I'm not talking about Berlin, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, these kind of places. Yes, you can have an enjoyable life there, I'm sure, but you will be really restricting yourself to a very small bubble and you'll be missing out on most of the culture of the country. Now, avoiding other English-speaking people is a bit of a double-edged sword, and I will go into the counter-argument to this point in just a minute. But this is actually something that I did intentionally do in Germany. I am very glad I did, because it helped me to learn the language. And it helped me to learn the language, I think, a lot quicker than I would have done otherwise. Might seem extreme, but English speakers are generally a little bit lazy when it comes to learning languages. And if it is possible to default to English, then we will most probably just do this. So I think if you're moving to a foreign country, then really take advantage of this and use the environment to meet the locals. In Germany, there is something which they refer to as vitamin B, and this is really talking about your social network. So Germany in general is not really known for professional networking or sort of under the rug handshake deals or that kind of stuff. It is in general a very fair and just society. But having said that, this vitamin B is very important. And there is a fairly strong culture here in Germany of getting opportunities through your social network, and whether that is an apartment which hasn't even come onto the market yet, or maybe a job opportunity, or hearing about other things through, friends or contacts. I don't really know of any country where a social network is not important, and really the only way to sort of start building this is to learn the language, learn the local customs and culture, and get integrated that way. Now, building a support group might seem like a bit of a contradiction to point number 5, but not necessarily. It really depends on how you go about it. And I think really the older we get, the harder it is to make friends and sort of meet new people and make new contacts. And if you couple that together with moving to a foreign country where, everything is different and new, it becomes quite challenging to make friends. A common way to do this in Germany is to join a Verein, like a club or a sports society, some sort of group that has regular meetups. Generally, we tend to bond with people over shared interests. And whether that is a hiking group, whether it's a sports club or a gardening club, whatever it is, generally, I think making these first baby steps is going to be easier if there is sort of a common shared interest. And it's just easier then to make friends and build up that network. Although having said that, in Germany, it does take a long time for Germans to call you a friend. This doesn't happen in a few days or a week. Generally, there needs to be a certain amount of time that elapses between the first meeting and the moment when you might be calling each other friends. This could be different in other countries, and this is where I sort of come on to contradict myself. Generally, you will have more in common, and it will be easier to sort of bond with other, let's say, immigrants or other people that have moved to the country. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean people from your own country. It could be people from anywhere, but it is nice and can really, help you to avoid feeling lonely and overwhelmed. It is important just to go about this with a bit of intentionality, because people know people, and you can very quickly end up in a bubble where the only people you know are other foreigners and you don't have any contact with the locals. And, it can go both ways. It really depends on what you're looking for. I had something similar to this in China. I was living in China for 2 years, and I had a very big group of friends. There were local Chinese and also people from all over the world. I think the difference was that most of the Europeans and the Australians there all spoke fluent Chinese. They were very highly educated. And so this really gave me a strong impetus to take it seriously and learn as quickly as possible. I don't think there's any right or wrong here. It's just something to be aware of, because I think often it is more difficult to leave or retract yourself from certain social groups than it is to build up new ones. There are a huge amount of costs associated with moving country. You are essentially starting over, starting from scratch. Unless you move everything with you, you have to buy, furniture, all sort of household stuff all over again. And for example, in Germany, if you are renting an apartment, you usually have to cough up 3 months worth of rent as a deposit. Now, of course, this is money that you get back later when you move out, but you've got to have it there and then ready to go. On top of that, a lot of apartments, at least here in Frankfurt where I live, do not come with a kitchen. So if you want to cook, if you want to have a kitchen, you will have to buy that yourself when moving into the apartment. So to avoid a complete meltdown, it is important to have a certain amount of savings which you can dip into to cover some of these expenses. The most important point of all is to have fun, to stay curious, to embrace the whole experience, say yes, and take the good and the bad all together. One thing I wish that I would have done right from the start is to document the whole process and the whole experience. And this doesn't mean necessarily having a YouTube channel. It could mean anything really. Writing a blog, it could just be a photo journal. It could be writing down notes just for yourself. It doesn't have to be for anyone else. But I find it's quite easy to forget things, and it's just nice to see the progress you've made, to look back and see things that really used to frustrate you and really confuse you, and now it's just kind of like a normal everyday thing. And I think the process of thinking things through and writing these thoughts and experiences down really does help to enhance the impact of them. These are just a few things which I see as being very important. I would love to hear if any of these things resonated with you. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.